Hello there, happily married woman. It is Dr. Siobhan here. Excited to be back with you on day number 2 of our self-care challenge. I hope that you are finding this experience worthwhile and beneficial for you so far. I have been really appreciative of those of you who were so vulnerable and sharing today on the topic that we talked about, being Superwoman, and how to shed your cape and why we put that cape on in the first place and why we don't want to take it out and all of those things that we shared. And, you know, it's amazing how much commonality we have, right? It's amazing, as I looked at many of your responses, how the theme throughout is that a lot of times we feel like we can't depend on other people, that if it is to be done, it is to be done by us. And the fear of rejection, the fear of disappointment, the fear of being let down by someone we depend on or look for acceptance from is very uncomfortable, so uncomfortable that we take on way too much for ourselves and extend ourselves in ways that cause us to be stressed out, overwhelmed, and overtaxed. And as you saw, as I shared my own responses to those questions, I am right there with you, right? I said that when I started this challenge, it was as much for me as for you all. And certainly I am learning a lot and continue to evolve and grow in this area myself. And I think when it comes to personal development and the space that I'm in as a marriage and life coach, what I would hope that everyone would kind of see, even as I share my own experiences and journeys, it's a never-ending journey, right? There are tools and strategies and techniques that you can use. You can put them in your tool belt, but they are only effective when you pull them out and put them to use. And so there are many times when all of us can say we know what we should be doing, even as we approach this topic of self-care. I don't have to convince any of us that we should be doing it, yet we're not. We're not doing it consistently. We're not doing it as intensely as we probably should to really notice a difference in how we show up and interact in the world. Kiana, your cape is off as soon as you go to your room to sleep. I get it. I get it. Like, that's probably for most of us the only time that we get to take that cape off. So I definitely understand what that is like, what it feels like. And I would be curious to know, are you getting enough sleep, right? Because that is one of the self-care practices, is actually getting enough sleep. So if you take your cape off and it's, you know, midnight and you're waking up at 5, that's not enough time, right? We all know that, and yet we do it, right? We don't get enough sleep. We don't eat right. We don't take care of ourselves physically as we should. And in an earlier live stream, I talked about the different types of self-care, the subtypes of self-care, and I'll just quickly review them here in case you didn't catch that. But there's sensory self-care, which involves your 5 senses, one of your 5 senses in terms of smelling, touching, looking, listening, tasting, right? Those are the 5 senses. There is self-care that revolves around pleasure, things that you'd like to do, activities that are enjoyable for you. As long as you're having a child or asleep, you're at peace. Yeah. But what about when they're not, Kiana? Like, do you find peace when they're not? Like, I'm sure you're probably doing all of the things when your children and your husband are awake, because as a woman, you shoulder a lot of responsibilities for your household. Number 3 was mental, right? The mental, in terms of mental challenge, learning something new or taking care of a task that has been taking up space in your brain and your mind. Number 4 was spiritual self-care. Number 5 was emotional self-care. 6, physical, and 7, social. And I don't think we often remember the social aspect. Being a very social person, that has become even more and more important to me over time, is to make sure that I'm connecting with people, whether that's on the phone or out in my events, which is why you've been seeing so much more of me being out doing events, because that social aspect of self-care is often neglected, and there aren't appropriate outlets for us as women to get together and encourage and empower each other. And so I'm always happy to be a part of events that let people do that. So today I wanted to come on and just, you know, in the evenings as part of this challenge, I share some content and some context around the next day's challenge, and also give you sort of like a preview of what the challenge will be for the following day. And tonight I wanted to come on and just really talk about why, you know, not taking care of ourselves is really no longer an option, that we cannot continue to put ourselves last. And I know we probably understand that on an intellectual basis, right? You're part of this challenge because you recognize that you do need to prioritize yourself, your own well-being above other things, and yet it's still really, really hard to do. And I am not one for the scare tactics at all, but when I really thought about this, and when I began to do some research and preparation for this conversation with you all tonight, you know, I think there's a fine line between, you know, not taking the time to practice self-care and then dipping into the area of self-neglect. And it's probably something that on any given day, most of us sort of teeter-totter on, like, I should be taking more time for myself, but I'm doing something, right? And then there's straight up self-neglect, where you literally, it's not even a matter of putting yourself last, it's like you're not even on the list at all, where a lot of times that's when you're just not eating. Like, you're not eating because you don't have the time, you can't prepare the food, you can't get it together, and so you're not eating. You may eat like a chip, a tortilla chip here, take a swig of juice there, in the midst of doing 1,001 other things, but you haven't even had a complete and proper meal. You're not sleeping, right? That's when you go to bed way too late because you kept yourself up doing all of the things, and then you know you need to wake up super early. And when you do those things, right, when you neglect yourself in that way of not eating and not sleeping over a long period of time, right, we all may have a moment or two where we just have to do what we have to do, but when that becomes a perpetual habit and that becomes more of your norm than the exception, that is leading into this area of self-neglect, which is a very, very unhealthy place to be. Another aspect of self-neglect is when you don't really put any boundaries up to protect yourself, right? To protect yourself emotionally, to protect yourself in terms of your time and your physical health and overall well-being. And that, I guess we could liken it to sort of the phrase that we've all heard of, sort of like being a doormat, where anybody needs anything, like you're always going to do it. You're never going to say no. You're never going to put any boundaries around anything. People can take advantage of you, walk all over you, because you are afraid of hurting their feelings, because you are afraid of disappointing them, because you're afraid of being perceived as the type of person that drops the ball or that is not dependable. And so we don't want to do that, right? We definitely want to make sure that we have boundaries in place and that we get into the habit of saying no to the things that we actually need to say no to. And when we don't do that, we really do dip again beyond just not good self-care, but into an area of self-neglect, because you're not even considering yourself. Like, you're so focused on what other people need, what other people require of you, that you're not even a consideration in the conversation. And we never want to not even consider ourselves, right? And then beyond that, the other piece There we go. We're back. Thank goodness we're back. I hope you guys come back because I know it paused for a minute. But shutting down and shutting out your feelings. And so this is something that's really easy for us to fall into and really easy for us to start doing. And I have to say that at times I am guilty of this, because a lot of times when you have a reaction to something, or you have a frustration or a concern that you want to bring to someone, right? And you bring it to them in a way that you believe is respectful and appropriate, and you try your best to practice all those tools I teach you for how not to blame and criticize and judge, and you're doing all of those things, and yet it still comes across as blaming, judgmental, critical, and their response is really negative. It really leads you to not wanting to say anything at all. And so you get into this place where you just are quiet, where you just really don't have anything to say at all. And that's not because you're not feeling anything. That's not because you're not having reactions to things, but it's because you don't want that negative response. You don't want that argument. You don't want that tension. And so let me just be quiet. Let me just neglect how I feel about this situation. Let me just work it out without saying anything. And, that is unhealthy too, because it breeds a lot of resentment. It breeds a lot of issues that are always underlying, right? That are always sort of underneath the surface, just like waiting to bubble. And it's really easy to fall into that place. And I will admit for myself that that is something that I struggle with, because after a while, when you have these conversations, right? And if we're talking about the context of marriage, when you have these conversations with your husband and they just never go right, you're like, why even bother having the conversation? And so I share that now, not to get into solutions to that, because that's probably a whole nother training, a whole nother challenge, a whole nother level of conversation, but to just raise your awareness that that is actually a form of self-neglect, right? And so we want to be able to articulate what is going on for us, not with the expectation that the other person is necessarily going to do anything or respond the way that we want or try to fix it. But when you have that agency, when you are empowered enough to express what's going on for you, that's just taking care of you, right? And we leave the rest of it to that other person, and they're going to do with it what they want to do with it, or they're going to do nothing with it at all. But at least you can rest easy knowing that you stood up for yourself. You've said what you needed to say in terms of how you were feeling. So that was like a long tangent, because that is not exactly what I wanted to come on and talk with you about. But I think it's still related. I think it's all related, because at the end of the day, when we dip into this place of prolonged lack of self-care and then extend into self-neglect, we give up a lot of things, right? We miss out on happiness, right? We miss out on fulfilled and exciting relationships. We miss out just on general health and wellness. We miss out on being fulfilled and at peace. And we also miss out on being productive, right? I'm sure you can think of, because you find yourself so overwhelmed with too many things to do, that you're just not productive. That you look at the day and you're sort of like, well, what should I even do? Like, what did I even accomplish today? I'm not quite sure. So those are the things we give up, right? And when we do that, over time, it just leads to chronic things that are just not healthy. It leads to weight gain, right? Because we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not eating well. It leads to chronic stress. It leads to fatigue. It leads to depression and anxiety. And so we got to stop it, right? We got to stop it. And so my question for you as we come to this conversation right now is, we know all that, right? Some of what I've just shared may be new. Some of it may just be a reminder of something that you've heard before. And, with any sort of health and wellness issue, the question I always like to ask is, what's your wake-up call? Like, when is enough so that you change your habits? When is enough so that you shift your priorities. When is enough enough so that your actions align with your values, right? Do you value yourself enough to put you higher on your priority list? And if not, what are you waiting for, right? And I say that not flippantly, but like just honestly and curiously, like what is it that you're waiting for to be the sign that you need to do that? Like, what is it? Hey, Lachelle, it's great to have you here. What is the sign you're waiting for, right? What is it going to take? What do you need to see? What do you need to experience in order to prioritize your self-care in the way that you need to? Is it a heart attack? Is it a health scare, right? Is it a trauma in your relationship, right? What is it? What is your wake-up call to put you first? And for me, I will share, that my wake-up call came with the experience of depression. And so that's not something that I believe I've publicly, explicitly shared here in this group, but I would raise my hand to say that I have battled with depression. And it's one of those things where I can't even remember when it started, and I can't even say that it's fully ended, because it's sort of like a snowball of circumstances, reactions, emotional responses that have culminated into me feeling like I am not myself, I am not well, and I need to do something about it. So that was my wake-up call. And as I share that, right, as I am vulnerable with you all, sharing that very personal and difficult thing for me to first admit to myself, for me to admit to my husband, for me to admit to my own parents, I do so and share that depression takes many different forms. And for me, right, you've heard of like the functional alcoholic, right? I feel like I was a functional depressive, that I wasn't the type of person that was just sitting on the couch, not enjoying life. I was still highly functional, getting a lot done. But there was a void on the inside, and there was no joy, and there was no happiness, and it's sort of, you're just like going through the motions almost like a zombie in your life, and you're not connecting, right? You're not connecting to who you are. You're not connecting to who it is you want to be. And so that was my wake-up call, like, Siobhan, like, this is nonsense. Like, you can't go out like this. Like, this is not how your story is going to end. You have to get it together. And that was my wake-up call, to put myself first. And that meant a lot of things. So as I was reading again, I came across this quote in this article that really, really highlighted what self-care means when you have a wake-up call, right? And it says, self-care sometimes means making tough decisions which you fear others will judge. Self-care involves asking for help. It involves vulnerability. It involves being painfully honest with yourself and your loved ones about what you need. And for me, that is so true. Like, it was painfully hard for me to let those words come out of my mouth as this woman who wore her cape, right? As this woman who always just did what needed to be done and did so with grace and class and poise and all of those compliments that I often got. It was difficult for me to make that call to the therapist's office to say my reason for coming in was I'm struggling with depression, right? Now that's my story, and that was my wake-up call, and I have learned to do things radically different as a result. And those things are not always well received by others. I think I shared with you when we did our first challenge, which was Find Your Calm Song, there were many, many days where literally I would just have to walk around with headphones on with my calm song playing on constant repeat. And that didn't bode well for interacting with other people in my life, but it was what I needed to do to cope. And I didn't feel guilty about it. I didn't feel shameful about it. I was like, I have to do this for me. what is your wake-up call? What is it going to take for you to put you first? Right? What is it going to take? Like, seriously think about that. And do you really have to wait that long, right? Whatever that endpoint is for you, whatever your quote unquote rock bottom to prioritize your own self-care, whatever that is, right? Do you have to reach that point? Or can you like catch it a few steps ahead? And I'd like to think that because you're participating in this challenge, because you're even watching this video, that you are willing, right? You are willing to do something to get it back on track. And for me, my road to recovery first involved spiritual self-care. That was step number one for me, spiritual self-care. Step number two was emotional self-care. And now I'm in the phase of like physical self-care where I'm doing more in terms of my eating and my overall physical health. And so because where I started was spiritual self-help, spiritual self-care, that's where I want us to start for tomorrow's challenge, right? And so what I'm going to ask you to do is very specific. Sure, absolutely, I'm happy to share. Kiana, thank you for appreciating it. What I want you to do is find 10 minutes tomorrow, or tonight even, if you have the time tonight. Take 10. I want you to take 10 or 15. If you could do 15, that would be awesome. 10 to 15 minutes. And I want you to enter into the presence of God in a way that maybe you haven't done before. And I want you to do that through what I like to call sort of guided meditation. And so I remember when I first came across the practice of meditation, the first experience I had with it was watching What's Love Got to Do with It, Angela Bassett in her Buddhist chants, right? And I was like, oh, that's not for me. And so I had this judgment against meditation for so long until I really began to understand what it was and really began to understand what it was as a discipline as a Christian, right? Meditation is a discipline as a Christian, and it's really tuning in to the voice of God, getting in his presence, opening yourself up to receive from him rather than always the one-way conversation of our prayer, which is us thanking God and telling him what we need. This is God's opportunity to really pour back into us, but it requires that we be still and quiet our minds. And for me, that's always hard because my mind is going 1,000 miles a minute. And so the way that I've been able to do that is through a Christian meditation app called Abide. And I'm sure if you listened to me more than 5 times, you've heard me mention this app, Abide. It's an app that I know for sure is on the iPhone, but I also know that they have a YouTube channel. So if you have a Samsung or some other type of phone or don't want to load any more apps on your phone, you can find it on YouTube. They have their own channel. And so the great thing about Abide is you can search by topic. So, and again, it's Abide, A-B-I-D-E. Okay, so I'm going to type it in to make sure that everyone's hearing me. It's an app or on YouTube. Okay, Abide. Let me see if I can actually, I don't think I can actually get the link and put the YouTube link. Yeah, so this has really helped me. I don't know if that's my channel or not. I don't know if that's the right link. I hope so. If it's not, just search Abide Christian Meditation and you will find it. So what's great about it, and especially as I'm looking on YouTube right now, you can actually find the topic that you most need some quiet time around. Okay, it did come up great. And every morning they have new ones, so you can get the daily meditation and just do that one, which is fine. Or again, if you're just starting out and you really need to hear from God in a particular area in your life, you can search topics, right? So when you go on YouTube, you can see the titles. I'm looking now, Overcoming Fear, dealing with depression, going through hard times, help with insomnia, making wise decisions, cleansing your mind. They have like so many different topics that you can select from. And then for most of them, you have the option of listening to them for like 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Some of them are really short. None of them are longer than 15 minutes. So this is a really quick and wonderful thing for you to be able to do. So I want you to find the time, again, either tonight or tomorrow, to listen to a guided meditation from Abide. Just try it, right? Just try it and let me know how it goes. If you do it and you're like, Siobhan, this is not for me, I hate it, fine. At least you tried it, right? And I'm not a spokesperson for them. I don't get any benefits from this. It's just something that I personally found incredibly helpful in my own journey. That has really helped me. And so I try my best to start each morning with one of these meditations, and it makes a ton of difference for how the rest of the day goes for me. So that is your challenge, to take 10 and listen to Abide, the Abide app on your iPhone, or you can just search for it in Google and YouTube channel and listen to one of them there. So thank you for tuning in, for those of you who are able to watch this live tonight. I don't know if I'm competing with a major TV show. My live numbers tonight were a little bit light, and if I am, that's okay. I'm glad that you're getting Abide, Ken. I'm going to like that quote there. Let me know how it goes, right? I will really be looking for you all in the comments tomorrow to see what happens when you experience Abide. I can't wait to hear all about it. Have a great, great night, everybody. Bye-bye.